Good afternoon. We will begin with the refuge and bodhicitta. O sangye chedan soge chonam la chanjo bardo dane chapsum je dage jinso gibe sunam je drola penjer sanje drobar sho Sanje chedan soge chonam la chansho parado dane chapsum je dage jinso gipe sunam je drola penjer sanje drobar sho Sanje chedan soge chonam la chansho parado dane chapsum je dage jinso gibe sunam je drola penjir sanje drobar sho semjen tamje dewa tam Dewe judan damra juje donga dan donga judan rawal jurche donga mebe dewa tamba tam min rawal jurche nyeren chata nitan rawe tanyon shambola nebra Dorje. In the Dharma expanse Palapasavakanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind as Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. Now think to yourself that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings who have all been our mothers in at least one, and if in at least one, then in many, many past lives, each sentient being has been our mother many, many times. And so we must repay their kindness that they showed us when they were our mothers by bringing them to Buddhahood, to the state free of all suffering. So think to yourself that that is the reason for listening to these teachings on the Abhidharma this afternoon, and listen with this motivation of bodhicitta. And in particular here, in talking about the Abhidharma, we are discussing Vasubandhu's Treasury of Abhidharma according to the commentary by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje. This commentary is entitled Youthful Play. It has 8 chapters, and we are discussing the 3rd chapter, the teaching on the world, which is a presentation of the truth of suffering. And when we're talking about the truth of suffering, the portion of the chapter we're talking about now is the suffering of birth. We have the 4 great sufferings that we experience as humans: birth, aging, sickness, and death. So now we are in the passage that speaks about the suffering of birth. It doesn't come right out and say this is the suffering of birth. It's not like like the instructions you see in the Torch of True Meaning by Jamgon Khyentse Lodrötai, or the Torch, or the Words of My Perfect Teacher by Patrul Rinpoche, or other such texts that teach about that are specifically teaching about the sufferings of birth, and they list all of the sufferings that you experience in the womb and so forth. It's different. Here it's talking about how it works, and in order to see that it's suffering, you then have to use your intelligence to actually examine it and look at it and see what is going on. Is this what is the nature like? You have to think about that yourself. It's not coming out and saying, this is suffering over and over again. It's saying, this is what it is, this is the 5 aggregates, this is that, this is the nature of this. And it doesn't come out and say, and this is all suffering directly. So we have to engage in the analysis ourselves. And instead of just taking my word for it or the word of any of the previous masters for it, you have to think about it for yourself and come to your own conclusions, because otherwise you're not going to have that stable understanding. Although, of course, if you come to the conclusion that being and reborn in some realm is actually pleasurable, then I might tell you you're mistaken. If you, I tell you, look again. But you have to do your own analysis and come to your own understanding of why the Buddha said this. What makes it really birth in the three realms of samsara pleasurable? We might think about the upper realms as being pleasurable. For example, maybe I'll save this. No, I will go on this direction when we are talking about the lifespans of sentient beings. I'll leave that for now. So in this chapter, there are the two portions. There are the two sections. There's the world of sentient beings and the world that contains them. We are discussing the first, the world of sentient beings. This has the 5 parts, and the first of them is the classifications of wanderers who are born. The second is the nature of interdependence, the manner of birth. The third is conditions for abiding after birth. The fourth is minds of staying and dying. And the fifth is categorizing beings in the 3 groups. And so today we will be discussing the end of the first section, the classifications of wanderers, and be the beginning of the second, the nature of interdependence. The classification of wanderers has 3 sections, classifying wanderers in 3 realms, classing them in 5, classing them in the 4 modes of birth. And at the end of the section on the 4 modes of birth, there's a discussion of what actually goes and takes birth. And that's the section that we're speaking about. And so and in the section on what goes to take birth, there's a discussion of, where does this come from? Where is that? Oh, anyways, there's the discussion of the actual, so this is the second of the 4, there's a discussion, the last part of this section is discussion of the manner that the between state goes into the mode of birth. So when you're going to be taking birth in one of the 4 modes of birth, and what are the 4 modes of birth? Birth from a womb, egg, heat and moisture, miraculous birth. These are the 4 types of birth. So first it talks about the first 2 of these, the frame of mind and birth from womb and an egg. The mind mistaken out of lust, it goes into its destination. Now here this is an interesting one because I was looking at it today. This interpretation of this couplet follows the explanation of Wangchuk Dorje, and it's also the same as in the Chim. Sort of like first the mind is mistaken, and then there's lust, and it goes into its destination. Another way of looking at it, which is what is described in the auto commentary by Vasubandhu, as well in the Yashomitra, is that what makes the mind mistaken is the lust. Therefore, because of lust, the mind is mistaken and it goes into its destination. So basically what it's saying, when the Bardo being is going into the womb, because in both birth from the egg and birth from the womb, then first it goes into the womb. The egg comes out in the form of the egg before the little reptile hatches. Or whatever hatches, but in both cases it enters the mother's womb, and what makes it go there is lust. So, and there are different types of lust. In fact, it's lust that makes all of the types of rebirth. So this is a very interesting and important thing that we have to consider if we want to think about, what we might think to ourselves, well, if I indulge myself in things that I enjoy and things that feel good, what's the problem with that? It may not be something that actually directly harms anyone else. But when you're engaging in something out of desire, greed, then you're reinforcing this habit of thought and so forth that perpetuates the cycle of rebirth. So this is why we can understand that engaging in pleasurable acts out of lust is considered a misdeed. And the harm that it brings may not necessarily be a harm that directly affects any other sentient being, but it will propel you into further suffering. So that's an important point to keep in mind, because right now in our present Western society, it's frankly hedonist, totally hedonist, and it's getting even more so. As a monk, I don't know if I can read the newspapers anymore. It's just like, I probably shouldn't read them. You don't even read newspapers, you read the news online. Just as bad, maybe even worse. At any rate, to go back to the commentary, with the I that arises from the power of karma, a being in this period of the between state sees the place where he will be born from far off. So because of karma, they have the I, they're able to perceive the place where they're going to be reborn. When entering either of the modes of birth from womb or from egg, if the being will be male, he has lust for the mother and hatred for the father. Now, in the auto commentary, it's actually, he has lust for the mother, or hatred for the father. So that's a little distinction in the two. I don't know how much of a distinction, but it's a kind of which is primary. So it's sexual lust that's discussed here. Or if female, lust for the father and anger for the mother. And if neuter, so means if the baby is going to be, if the being is going to be reborn with, what we say, intersex, is that with the intersex with unclear sexual organs and so forth, then there's a certain type of lust that predominates. And so that's what it's saying here. If neuter, he has the desire of either the male neuter or the female neuter. So it's not really male, really female, the kind of odd, what do we say, unclear. How do I say this gracefully? I'm not going to be able to say it gracefully. They're born and they're not really boys or really girls. This happens in a certain number of babies. It's more common than you'd think. As the being has this particular desire, the mind is mistaken. So it's the desire. So it's either the lust for the father or mother, or the anger for the mother or father. The mind is mistaken, and out of lust it goes between the organs during copulation. So the being in the bardo sees the two parents engaging in sexual activity, and then goes into the womb. And then it goes. Then it says. Then it wants to sleep. So it goes amongst the semen and blood, and it's into its destination, the uterus. Okay, so they did not know anything about ovulation, ova, fallopian tubes, or anything about that, because this was the 4th century. You've got to remember that people in Western society thought that babies came from storks until the 1950s. Well, I'm exaggerating, but we didn't know very well either until recent research. If you had asked people in the 9th century or the 19th century how are babies born, would they have said anything about ovulation? I don't know when they figured out about ovulation. But it probably, the 19th or 18th century, no. They would have had some wacky explanation too. But however, in the traditional time, the ancients in India could see that there was a placenta, which they called blood. They could see that there was sperm. And so what would happen? They'd assume that the mixture of the two would develop into the fetus, which is kind of reasonable. Because they didn't have microscopes. They didn't have the apparatus to really look at it the way that modern science has. So you have to remember that when thinking about it. So you can think about it in a different way. From the modern perspective, we can say, well, okay, maybe it's not semen and blood. Maybe it is a sperm and an ovum. Same, but the basic thing, you've got the consciousness coming, entering the womb, entering the egg at the moment that it's fertilized in our modern conception, or in the ancient conception, going into the womb and feeling like it's a ball of yarn. So it goes amongst the semen in the womb into its destination, the uterus. Once it has gone into the womb, which it is like a ball of yarn, so nice and soft and comfy, I guess, it feels affection for the semen and blood as mine, and it stays. So here's that first ego clinging, mine, clinging to the form as me. So that's with excuse me, that's with the birth from womb and birth from an egg. And so that's the sexual lust and so forth. And in both of these, there's the conception or the rebirth linking within the womb. The difference is that the egg would then form around the, I don't know the science words for this anymore. It's been a long time since I've actually studied science. But the egg would form around the embryo and the yolk and whatever, and the egg would be then laid. But the birth from a womb would stay in the womb. So that's a difference. But other than that, the manner of entering the womb is the same. But when you have other types of birth, we've got 4 modes of birth. We've got the birth from egg in a womb, birth from womb, birth from an egg, birth from heat and moisture, and a miraculous birth. So how is it that the being goes there? Well, it's still a question of the mind being mistaken out of lust or out of desire. And so the next one talks about the frame of mind and birth from warmth. Others from longing for a smell. Unlike the 2 just described, that is the birth from the womb and birth from the egg, in birth from warmth and moisture, that is, other beings go to a clean or unclean place for longing for a smell, according to their karma. So they're in the bardo, and because in the bardo they have the faculties, right? So they can smell. They smell something that smells good to them, and that they get attached to. They long for, they feel attachment to a place, and therefore take birth in that place. And then the next couple of words talk about the frame of mind in miraculous birth, or place. In miraculous birth, they go out of longing for a place. This is entering the place of birth in a different manner than either in birth of a womb or an egg. So it's a different way. They have the idea they're longing for a place. For example, someone is going to be reborn in the realm of the 33, and they have this idea of the realm of the 33, and as it describes, they just have this feeling like they're getting up from a cushion and going up and up into the realm of the 33. So that's what it's like for them. Now, the rest of how they appear in the realm of the 33 and so forth will be described in the second half of the chapter. So we'll leave that for today. So we see that the main thing that causes beings to take rebirth is that lust. But then you kind of wonder, who would ever want to be reborn in hell? Because it's such a horrendous place. I mean, why would anyone ever want to be reborn in hell? So how is it that beings could be reborn there? Well, it's again because the mind is mistaken because of their desire. Well then, it says in the next paragraph, the top of page 231, well then, how is it that one longs for hell? Because the mind is mistaken, one is tormented by heat, cold, rain, and wind. So in the pardo, in the between state, the being has the experience of being buffeted by cold rain and wind, just terrible cold rain and wind. And they want to get warm. Seeing fire in hell, that nice orange glow down there, one wants to get warm and rushes there. Alternatively, when suffering from and tormented by heat, it's just like incredibly hot in the bardo state. You want to get cold. Oh, look over there. It's nice and cool down there. They see the cold house as cool and rushes there. Thus is the link to the next rebirth made. So by having the experiences because of their karma in the bardo, they have the experiences of either heat or cold, and then wanting to get away from that, they see either cold or heat and rush towards it and end up unknowingly, unintentionally almost, driven by karma into hell. And then the shape that it enters with, they fall head first to hell. They, hell beings in between state, fall head first to hell. This is because it is said, all those who slander the austere and fully restrained seers will tumble headlong into hell and not to anywhere else. The austerities are general, and full restraint is abiding in the 12 purified qualities. The seers are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And here, Bodhisattvas, we don't mean Bodhisattvas like we usually talk about in the Mahayana. We mean beings who are about to take their last birth as a Bodhisattva, so Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And that's what we mean, the Bodhisattva in the last birth. So these are beings who have, naturally, they dwell in the austerity of practice within discipline. They have all of the vows. They fully restrain themselves. So anyone who slanders them is then going to tumble headlong into hell. So it's like the hell beings. I mean, if you kind of imagine it, it's like you're rushing to get away from the cold. You rush towards the heat and you trip and you fall head first down into hell. Or the other way, you're rushing to get away from the heat and you trip and fall head first down into the cold realms, the cold hells. So that's the suffering, how the being takes birth in the hell realms. But when we talk about beings entering with a mistaken conception, viewing the place that they're taking birth at with lust and so forth, is that all beings? It's actually not all beings. Some beings are a little bit different. And in particular, the Chakravarti emperors, the Prateka Buddhas, or as I translated them in this book as self-Buddhas, and then the third would be the Bodhisattvas, who are about to take their birth as lust. They enter the womb with a different state of mind. They don't go out of a mistaken conception as normally. So this says, the first were the wheel-wielding emperors, that is a Chakravarti. So wheel-wielding, chakra, means a wheel. Varati means to turn, and so in English we'd call this wheel-wielding emperors. One enters wittingly. So while the being in the between state enters the womb, it is not always because the mind is mistaken, and this should read not as it does, but as the mind is mistaken because of lust. The sutras tell of 4 instances of entry into the womb. So there are 4 different types of entry into the womb. In the first of these, one stays in and enters the womb without awareness, but enters it wittingly. So this is the wheel-wielding emperor, it's a he. He knows what he's doing when he enters the womb, but then once he's in there, he's unable to maintain his awareness while in the womb. So that's the wheel-wielding emperor. One enters wittingly. And then what distinguishes self-Buddhas, and one stays as well. So one not only enters, but stays knowingly as well. So the self-Buddha knows what they're doing as they enter, and they know what they're doing as they're staying. And then what distinguishes bodhisattvas, and one emerges too. So the bodhisattvas not only know what they're doing when they enter and when they are staying, they also know when they come out, when they go through what we usually call birth. And one not only enters and stays, but emerges knowingly too. And what distinguishes ordinary beings, others are ignorant of all. Others are ignorant of all 3, entering, staying, and emerging. So you've got a very, very small number of beings who basically are kind of know what they're doing at some point during the birth process. Everyone else is just ignorant. So the Chakravartis, they're the wheel-wielding emperors. They know what they're doing as they're going in. They enter wittingly. Then the self-Buddhas stay wittingly as well. And then the Bodhisattva also emerges wittingly. And then in terms of birth from the egg, and always if oviparous. So not always that you get to use a word like oviparous in a translation. So oviparous, and the being is always deluded if oviparous or born from an egg. So in all instances in being born from the egg. But as it says we were talking the other day about humans who were born from the eggs, and one of them was a Prateka Buddha, a self-Buddha. So how does that square? Because he was born from an egg. The son of King Panchala was born from an egg. Did I mention that story? Yeah. How did that happen? Well, there are 2 different types of Prateka Buddhas. One of them is called the rhino-like Prateka Buddha, or the self-Buddha, and the other is called the congregating self-Buddha. The rhino-like self-Buddha is the better, the higher one. And the congregating is the lower. And so when you say that they enter and stay willingly, that's for the rhino-like. So that's one explanation. The other is that, well, this only applies to beings born from the womb. Since the son of King Panchala was born from an egg, it didn't apply to him. But that's kind of funny. Anyways, that's the sort of doubt that you read about in the Abhidharma. Now the reason for this, explaining the reason for the first three, the three wheel-wielding as well as the two self-awakened enter the womb because of their karma or their wisdom, or both are vast respectively. So you've got three of them. You've got the wheel-wielding emperor, and then the two self-awakened. So the self-awakened are the self-Buddhas and the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas. So for those who enter knowingly but stay and emerge unknowingly, and those who enter and stay knowingly but emerge unknowing, so the first who enter knowingly but stay and emerge unknowingly, that's the wheel-wielding emperors, and those who enter and stay knowingly but emerge unknowingly, the self-Buddhas, and those who are knowing in all three, the Bodhisattvas, are the three, respectively, the wheel-wielding emperor, as well as the two self-awakened individuals, self-Buddhas and Tathagatas, that enter the womb knowingly. This is the reason that they enter in this way, is because their, that is, the wheel-wielding emperor's karma or merit is vast. So in the first instance, the wheel-wielding emperor, in order to be reborn as a wheel-wielding emperor and to have dominion, peaceful dominion over 1, 2, 3, or 4 continents, takes a lot of merit. So they have vast merit. Their karma or merit is vast. And if you're going to reborn a self-Buddha, then you have to have a lot of wisdom. You have to spend many ages, 100 ages meditating. Or because of their self-Buddha's wisdom for meditating for 100 eons is vast. Or because both of the Buddha's accumulations are vast, respectively. But now you're going to say here, wait a minute. Are they actually Buddhas, self-Buddhas, and wheel-wielding emperors when they enter the womb? Not yet. And so that's what this next sentence says. When they enter the womb, they are not yet Buddhas and so forth, but they are called by their future appellation. So when we're talking about them here, this is an important point about the Great Exposition School. It's different than the Mahayana. When the Bodhisattva, for example, with Siddhartha Gautama, entered Queen Maya Devi's womb, he entered it because of his vast merit and his vast wisdom. He was able to enter and stay in there knowingly and so forth, right? At that point, he was still a bodhisattva. He didn't become the Buddha until he sat under the Bodhi tree. In the Mahayana, the explanation is different, but here we're speaking about the foundation vehicle. So at that point, the Buddha was still a bodhisattva. But when we say Buddha in the verse, or Tathagata in here, we're talking about them, we're kind of using hindsight. Calling them by the future name. For example, like you can think you do the same thing in ordinary life. When someone gets pregnant, she doesn't always, you don't know who's in your womb or what they are. And it used to be that you couldn't even tell the sex until they were born. Nowadays, we do ultrasounds. And so babies would be born without a name. And then the parents would give the name like a day later or 2 days later. Then when the baby grows up and mom is reminiscing, I remember when I was pregnant with George. Now, at that time that he was in the womb, it wasn't George. He hadn't named. You didn't know if it was going to be George or Georgette, right? So it's the same. We do the same thing now. It's exactly the same sort of experience. Okay, here's something I already said, a little bit out of order. But the self-Buddha, both entering and staying knowingly and birth from the egg always being diluted, are contradictory because the son of King Panchala was born from an egg and was a self-Buddha, you say. This is not a fault because entering and staying knowingly is in terms of the rhino-like, that is, those self-Buddhas who go off and meditate on their own, like rhinoceroses, and birth from the egg is in terms of the congregating self-Buddhas who gather in groups of 500 in charnel grounds and meditate together, according to Purnavardhana's explanation. Alternatively, entering and staying knowingly is in terms of birth from the womb. So now we have finished that first of those 5 sections, the classifications of wanders, and now we've come to the nature of interdependence, the manner of birth. We've talked about what beings are, what is in the Bardo state, what takes birth. So now we have to talk about how is it that things take birth. And this is an important section because one of the most frequent questions that comes up at teachings when people ask questions, number one is, how do I deal with my anger? Because people don't really ever realize that there are other afflictions you have to deal with too, but it's always, how do I deal with my anger? It gives us the most problems. The second, maybe third, I don't know. Another popular question is, what is it that takes rebirth? How does rebirth work? So that is what this section, we've just been over what takes rebirth. Now we're going to be describing it. So the versary, and so this section has three parts, 3 topics. The manner of the aggregates alone link rebirth, the beginningless continuum of the aggregates, and the third is understanding the nature of interdependence. So the first one is the manner in which the aggregates alone link rebirth. To read the stanza, there is no self, mere aggregates. Continuums of between states assembled by afflictions and karma enter the womb. It's like a lamp. So according to the outsiders, here in the commentary it says outsiders, this means non-Buddhists. You could call them extremists, outsiders, non-Buddhists. It follows that there is a self because sentient Buddhas transmigrate to different worlds. In other words, if we're going to say that we're going to reincarnate, there has to be something. If there is going to be some future reincarnation of Khenpo David, like when I am reborn as an ant, there has to be some essence of Khenpo David that then goes and enters whatever it is, the egg that an ant is born from, right? Otherwise, you can't say it's the same person, can you? It's the same being. So if you don't have some soul that goes from lifetime to lifetime, how can you say that there is, how can there be rebirth? What would actually take rebirth? So that's what the non-Buddhists say. But this does not pervade. So pervade here is a technical term we see in a lot of Buddhist it talks about logic. So pervade is like saying that is not necessarily so. You could say, and sometimes I'm thinking maybe I should stop using the word pervade in English translations and use the word that we normally use, which is necessarily. A little bit different. And the logic is a little bit different, has some subtle differences. This does not pervade. It's not necessarily so because there is no self that accepts or rejects in the internal aggregates that make up the being. So in other words, when you say a self that accepts or rejects, what that means is that there is no soul or Atman or me, real me, that says, I'm going to do this. That means accepting something. I'm not going to do this. It's rejecting. I want this. That's accepting. I don't want that. That's rejecting. So there's no self. There's like no me. It's not like there is, to use the term popular in contemporary philosophy, of a ghost in the machine, of like some sort of little. In Descartes, he talks about the homunculus is that the way you say the word homunculus somewhere in the pituitary gland or something like that? That's kind of making the decisions for everything in the brain. It's kind of like sitting there watching the movies that the brain is showing it to it, according to the Descartes. And there are cute little pictures of this homunculus sitting in the brain someplace. But there is no but in the Buddhism we say that there is no ghost in the machine like that, to just use a contemporary term. If you follow philosophy, how many of you actually study philosophy? Why am I saying this? There's no sort of self-real me inside the machine of the body. It's just the 5 aggregates. There's no separate self other than those, and none of them are actually that self. Well, then what provides continuity between the state of death and rebirth linking? So when we go back to Khenpo David being reborn as an ant, if I'm lucky, Really, if I'm lucky, I'll be reborn an ant, compared to what I could be reborn as. So what is it that goes if there's not a self, if there's no soul of Khenpo David that then goes and inhabits an ant egg? What is it? What is it? Well, it's the aggregate. There is merely the continuum of the aggregates themselves. Labeling that continuum as the self is not refuted. So you can give it the name. We've got a continuum of the aggregates. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it the self, you can call it the soul, the Atman, you can call it Jello, you can call it any name. The name is entirely unimportant. What's important to understand is that there's no single, solid, autonomous thing that can take what it wants and reject what it doesn't want. There is merely so it's just merely the continuum of the aggregates. So the aggregates are momentary. So in one moment you have form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. Then in the next moment there's form, feeling, conception, and consciousness. The form, feeling, conception, and consciousness in one moment acts as the cause for that in the next. That arises and perishes in a nanosecond, but it also functions to cause the one in the next moment. And we look at it, and because there's a similarity over time, then we'd say, oh, it's the same. But actually, in each moment, it's arising and perishing in every moment. The aggregates alone have no power to transmigrate to new aggregates without stopping. It's because the aggregates themselves, form arises in one moment and perishes. How can that form transmigrate anywhere? If you're going to transmigrate, you have to have duration, but it's instantaneous. It arises and perishes. And then the next moment it arises, a new form arises and perishes, and then a new form arises and perishes in each moment. And so they seem similar from moment to moment. So we say, oh, it's one thing. It's just a continuum that we confuse as being all one thing, when actually it's multiple things that are arising and changing. So to look at it in terms of my poor understanding of modern physics that comes from reading the various popular literature on things like quantum mechanics that occasionally comes out, is you've got these, looking at things on the subatomic state, you've got quarks and all these subatomic particles that are coming in and out of existence. The Italian physicist Carlo Rovelli had a really wonderful phrase that I'm not going to get exactly right. He said it was the frenzied swarming of subatomic particles popping in and out of existence. Things coming in and coming out of, popping in and out of existence. And they come together, and on the coarse level that we see with our eyes, we don't see that. We don't see that things are changing over time. Like when we look at the atoms here in the copper and so forth in this Dharma wheel, it looks to us like they're the same thing, but actually they're constantly moving around. The electrons are bopping back and forth. The quarks are coming in out of existence on this really tiny, tiny scale that we can't perceive. That's exactly what we're saying in the Buddhist. It's not just with the form, external form or internal form. It's also with our minds, that every single moment are changing. And the moments are really fast, as we'll get to later on in this chapter. So each, they're momentary, and they change from, they each produce subsequent. They all produce subsequent aggregates, but there's no single thing that you can find, no single enduring thing. So the aggregates alone have no power to transmigrate with new aggregates without stopping. They are impermanent, because continuums of the between states that are fully ripened results and personally made results assembled by afflictions and karma enter the womb. So in other words, the cause of karma so the causes are karma, your fully ripened karma, and also the karma that produces the personal results that we spoke about last year. These are different types of results. We don't need to go into them in detail right now, but basically they're results of your afflictions and your karma. So the karma, the afflictions are the greed, hatred, desire, ignorance, wrong view, and so forth. The karma is either merit or a non-meritorious karma, not neutral karma for fully ripened. that directs the continuum of the affliction of the aggregates. It forces it in taking the rebirth in a womb or so forth. It is like a lamp that is momentary but burns in a continuum of moments. So a lamp is traditional because they had, and I think people who've been to India and Nepal, well, you'll know about a butter lamp. You go out and you light a butter lamp around the stupa, so you have some idea of what it is. But people who haven't really been there don't really know that example. So you can think of it like a candle. You've got a candle, you light the top, and it looks like it's just one candle flame, and then slowly the candle melts and it goes down to the base. So it looks like it's one candle flame, but actually in every single instant, there are different pieces of wax, different bits of wax, or molecules of wax, which is an oil, paraffin, or whatever it is burning. There are different molecules that are burning. So we think it's one flame, but actually it's different little bits of globules of fat are being burned in every single instant, right? All the way down. It looks like one single flame, but actually it's the product of all sorts of millions of different instances of combustion all happening. We say it's one flame, but actually it's like a bunch of things all happening. In any given moment, there are a bunch of moments of reactions of combustion going on, and then over the continuum there is a lot. The combustion goes from moment to moment as the candle bursts down to the next one, and then when the candle's getting down to the stub, if you were in a old society and where they didn't have butane lighters, you would take your next candle and you'd light it from the stub of the first one and put it over there. Then it would burn down. And you'd light the third candle from that, just in that. So you'd say, oh, it's the same flame. But it's not. It's going on from one to the next. Even within the course of a single candlestick, you could watch it burn down. It goes, you've got your 12-inch, I'm in Canada, your 30-centimeter candle flame. It's going to burn down. And you're going to get down. When you've got down to about 1 centimeter, then you light your next 30-inch. 30, I'm getting my measurements, I better just be American. Your next 12-inch candle and so forth, until you, it just goes on and on until you let it go out. Obviously, if you really look at that analogy carefully, they're different. But we'll just use it, we'll leave it as that. When you have analogies like this, you shouldn't take them too literally. You should remember it's to illustrate one aspect, but they're not completely the same as what they're describing. Otherwise, candles aren't propelled by karma and afflictions, are there? Candles are just, they're matter, they're form. Okay, the beginningless continuum of the aggregates. Just as propelled the continuum arose in stages, then from karma and afflictions goes to the next world, beginningless wheel of existence. So just as propelled, so it's propelled by ignorance and formation. These are the first two of the 12 links of interdependence that we will be discussing for the next couple of days. The continuum of the five aggregates, form, feeling, conception, and consciousness, arose in the stages of consciousness, name and form, 6 sense bases, contact, and feeling, a missing comma. So here we've got these. So you go through these different stages. Then here, death in the womb, death as a small child, and death in the prime of life are propelled by the prior accumulation of the being's own specific karma. So when we're talking about the links from consciousness up to feeling, these are the links that occur as the fetus develops in the womb. And as it develops, of course, it might get to the stage of name and form, and then there might be a miscarriage, or there might be an abortion, or whatever. The being might die early, depending upon the karma, or so forth. The order it develops is described in the sutras. At first, it's mushiness. From mushiness, the oval. From the oval comes the oblong. From the oblong comes the solid. From the solid, the hands and feet move, hair, fur, and nails and such. The faculties with form and organs develop in sequence. At first, it's mushiness. So what you have is you have a mixture of semen and blood that is about the consistency of yogurt. So it's mushy. Okay? So it's mushiness at first. There's no real texture or anything. So remember, we're talking about ancient Indian ideas. We're not talking about sperm. We're not talking about zygotes and embryos and all that because they couldn't see them. You can't see them until they get bigger. So at first, when you would have someone who would miscarry very early in a pregnancy, then if you're looking with a naked eye, all you can really see is just like the placenta, right? You can't see any being in there. But then there's a point where you can start to see something and it's kind of oval when they miscarry slightly later. So from mushiness, the oval. So first the embryo develops into an oval shape. And that oval gets a little bit longer, turns into an oblong shape. And then that oblong starts, it's still kind of like not really distinct. And then it becomes solid. And then from solid, then you start having little limbs that start sticking out of the solid. And the hands and feet start moving. And then eventually you develop hair, fur, and nails and so forth in the womb. And then the faculties with form and organs develop in sequence. So to read so the organs here refer to primarily those that provide the bases, the physical basis for the sensory faculties. Remember that the eye faculties that flax flower, the pure light. So here the organs primarily means like the physical organ of the eye and so forth, according to Yashomitra. The faculties produced by sustenance and so forth. So produced by sustenance means that they develop because they're fed, right? So we've got the sustenance of the placenta and birth from a womb, of the yolk and birth from an egg, and they mature. And then from accumulating karma and performing afflicted conduct itself, the body disintegrates. So this is, so basically you're saying that you've got the faculties form, it's sustained in the womb, then it goes out and you continue to eat and so forth. And then because of your actions and because of karma, at some point you die. That all falls apart. And it goes back into the between state. Then just as before, the continuum of the between state goes to the next world by aging and death and by birth. So here he's giving an overview of the 12 links of interdependence. You start with ignorance and formation in the previous life, then you have the development of this life from consciousness, name and form, sixth sense basis, contact, feeling, craving and grasping, that's leading to becoming, leading to aging and death, and then so on, aging and death, becoming, leading to birth in the next lifetime, and then aging and death, and so forth in a big circle, a cycle of this. So this is because this is a beginningless wheel of existence. So it's a constant cycle through these 12 links of interdependence. So basically, when you talk about the first two links, the karma, the ignorance and formations, we're talking about the causes for this current life. Then we've got all the links from consciousness up until becoming, and that's talking about how we developed and what we do in this lifetime. And then you talk about birth and aging and death. The final two links are talking about what are the results of that in the next lifetime. That's looking at it from the perspective of this lifetime, right? Of course, they're all pretty much the same, as we'll get into, but these are the 12 links of interdependence. So basically, this comes into a cycle, and it's actually a beginningless cycle, because anytime there is a result, like when we say that there is a being that is born, it's reborn because of karma and afflictions. The being has to have had a cause. Otherwise, beings would just appear magically out of nowhere. But that doesn't happen. So there has to be a cause. Things don't happen without causes, and that cause has to precede. You don't have causes happening later. Causes happen before. It's like when you're planting grain. You have the grain that you're planting, the seeds that you plant, the grain seeds that you plant in the ground, you plant them. But those seeds had to have come from someplace else. Where did they come from? They came from, you bought them from the seed company. Well, where did the seed company get them? They grew them in a field and then collected them to use as seed. And those plants that they grew in the seed in the field came from other seeds. Those came from plants that came from other seeds, back and back and back and back and back, all the way. Even if you keep going, if we look at it from a perspective of thinking about of evolution, you can trace it kind of in a sequence all the way back to the development of the first plants, and even that did not happen without a cause. Even that came with causes. Even if you look at it from the scientific explanation, it's the same. Everything comes out of causes, including our consciousnesses. And so the beings that are developed, it's not only the physical factor, the physical elements that create our body that comes from causes, it's also the consciousness that comes from causes. And the cause was a previous consciousness. Everything comes out of a cause. And those causes are limited in time and space. They have to be at the right time and space. If there's going to be a result in a particular location, the causes have to be able to produce the result in those locations. To put it simply, if you plant a flower over there, you're not going to get, if you plant the seeds over there, you're not going to get the flower over there, unless you do something tricky like plant it over there and then transplant it. But otherwise, but even then you can see there's a causal continuum. If you don't transplant the flower, then you're not going to have that happen. There has to be that connection between in location and time, spatio-temporally. If we use modern language, maybe it's better not to. So that's basically the idea. We've got this beginningless level of, because the causes always have to proceed, there has to have been a previous cause, which means that there couldn't have been a beginning to samsara. Otherwise, there would have to have been something that started without a cause. And if things could start without a cause once, then they would have to be able to, why wouldn't they happen without causes later? But we can see that everything happens with causes. And so therefore we can infer from that there must have been causes back in an infinite level. Even when you go back to the beginning, the primal state of the universe, whether it is the Big Bang idea of there being some incredibly small, dense lump, and because it's a singularity, we can't figure out what could have produced that lump. We have no idea of getting beyond it. Still, we can infer that something caused that lump to happen. We just can't explain what it was. Or when you describe it in terms of the formation of the universe in the Buddhist terms, which we'll describe later, the traditional Buddhist terms, then also there was something beforehand. There was the wind of karma. There was always a cause that precedes a result in relative terms. So that's the basic idea of interdependence, this cycle of going from one existence, going through all the 12, and because of ignorance, acting out of craving and grasping, and then performing karmic acts of becoming, that then result in later birth. And when you have birth, then you have aging, death, and wailing, and lamentation, and so forth. That all comes out of, it's just a cycle that goes over and over again. That's the cycle of samsara. Interdependence. 12 links of interdependence. Understanding the nature of interdependence. This is 4 topics. The periodic links of interdependence, the essence of each link, teaching the 3 all afflicted through examples, and teaching these links all as the 4 states. So these are 4. The first of these 4 is the periodic links of interdependence. So it's kind of like giving an overview first. That's what you can think of this one is. Like we're just trying to get an idea, what are they? So the links of so that's the first section, and so the first one, the periodic links of interdependence, has 2 topics, the overview of the classifications and an extensive explanation of the links. And so the overview of the classifications has 2 points. The first is classifying it in 12. So there are 12 links of interdependent origination. The continuum of the aggregates comes from another world into this next one and goes from here to the next, the period of 3 births. So when we're talking about the 12 links of of interdependence, you can talk about them in a variety of different ways, and we'll get into some of these different ways in the coming days. One way is to talk about them in like how they happen in a single moment for any action. But you can also think about them in terms of how they go through from life to lifetime, lifetime to lifetime, and that's the context that we're talking about here. So we're talking about it in terms of 3 lifetimes: the previous lifetime, current lifetime, and future lifetime. Now, saying previous, current, and future doesn't mean that there are only 3 lifetimes. It means that we're just looking at it from perspective of this current lifetime. In order to refute that the entry into samsara happens either without a cause or incompatibly with its cause, it's taught that there are 12 links of interdependent origination. So without a cause means like everything has, basically saying everything has a cause. And saying incompatibly with its cause means that the result has to be the type of result that comes from a cause. Again, a simple analogy is that when you plant a rice seed, you do not grow an oak tree. If you plant an acorn, you will not get rice plants. The cause and the result have to have some sort of compatibility. So it is taught that there are the 12 links of interdependent origination: ignorance, formation, consciousness, name and form, 6 sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, becoming, birth, and aging and death. Aging and death is 2 words, but it's considered 1 length. Okay? That's sometimes you might look at this and say, birth and aging and death, that's 13. And if you count name and form as 2, then that's 14. How do I get 13? How do I get 12? So those 2 they all go together. Name and form and aging and death are each counted as 1. So condensing this into 3, at the top of page 235, it says, in 3 parts. These are in the 3 parts of previous, middle, and next lives, or 3 times. So that's present, past, and future. So here, something that will become clear over the time. We're talking about 3 lives. We're talking about it from the perspective of this current life. So the present life means now, this present life. Past life means, past life. Future life means when I'm reborn as an ant, if I'm lucky. Right? So those are the 3 lives: past life, future life, ant life. Future ant life. Now, when I'm reborn as an ant, that would be the present life. And it has its own set of, and then this life would be the previous life, and the ant life would be the middle one, and then the future 2 ones would be what I'm born as after I'm born as an ant. Hungry ghost. I hope I'm not going down like that, but it's possible. You have to be careful of it. We can't assume anything. In 3 parts. So the parts are in relation to 1 life. It doesn't mean that you go through all 12. It means that they're kind of all the parts that are the parts that are the present life in this one are the previous life in relation to your future lifetime. Right? So it's not like it's all one. This is because if you don't get that, you kind of wonder, how do you get back to the beginning, from the end? It's because it's all kind of going, you've got multiple levels of cycles of interdependence happening or multiple ways of looking at the cycles of interdependence at the same time. So this will be explained more later. The extensive explanation of the links, and this has three topics: how they are completed in 3 lifetimes, grouping them into afflictions, karma, and bases, and the third is dispelling others' doubts. So how they are completed in 3 lifetimes. This has 4 topics explaining their individual natures, explaining the 3 periods that arise. The third is teaching that they are periodic, and the 4th is rebutting that this contradicts the sutras. So I'm just going to explain the first of these little sections today. We'll get to the 3 periods that arise, which is a little bit more in detail. We'll save that one for tomorrow. The previous and next 2 each, the middle 8 with all complete. So of these 3 lifetimes, in the previous lifetime and the next lifetime, there are 2 each. They are ignorance and formation and birth and aging and death, respectively. So in the previous lifetime, you have ignorance and formation. In the future lifetime, you have birth and aging and death. Looks like 3 words, but it's 2 links. It is three. No, it's 5 words, actually. Birth and aging and death is 5. It looks like 3 nouns, but it's actually 2 links. And in this lifetime, we have all of the other 8: consciousness, name and form, 6 sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and becoming. So that's how, so they all go. In the middle, the 8 from consciousness to becoming are presented. So we're saying, basically, when we talk about 3 lifetimes, we're talking about 2 in the past lifetime, 8 in the present, 2 in the future. This is intended in terms of all the links complete, as in the first 3 modes of birth in desire. For example, when you are born in the desire realm from a womb, from the egg, or from birth and moisture, then there's a gradual development of the organism. Like, for example, if you look at a frog, you've got the birth from heat and moisture, according to the Abhidharma. Heat and moisture. We talked about this yesterday. Birth from heat and moisture. So you have the frog, you have the egg turns into tadpole, and then the tadpole turns into there's another word, there's a little froglet. And the froglet then turns into a frog, and then the frog is eaten. So in that case, that case of development, the various different stages, the consciousness, name and form, contact, feeling, and so forth, all develop in order. With birth from a womb, like with human birth from a womb, you have, at the beginning, you just have the mushiness in there. There are no sensory faculties, no nothing. At that point, the being has kind of gone to sleep, not very aware of things, and then gradually the different faculties happen, the name and form, 6 sense bases, then contact, and then feeling. And so the progression. So when we're talking about the 12 links of interdependence on this level, we're also talking about the stages of development of a being from the course of conception or rebirth linking until the time of death, basically, is what we're talking about. So that's what we're saying, that this is talking about the development. In miraculous birth, the between state and the 2 higher realms, it is not necessarily thus. So in these situations, there's not necessarily development because the being is born miraculously and fully developed. They don't go through all of those states when we're thinking about it in terms of like the miraculous birth. For example, a being who is reborn from the desire realm into the formless. They die, and then the next moment, without a bardo, they're born in the formless realm, which is not really any particular location. They are in that formless realm, and they don't go through all of the states of development. They just immediately are in that formless realm. Just next moment right there. Similar with the form realm, or other places where they're born miraculously, then the beings would appear, like in the form realm, they appear fully formed, even wearing their robes already, as we'll get to. So that's the difference. So here we're looking at the 12 links of interdependence in terms of the development of a being, the progressions, the stages that a being will encounter in relation of 3 successive lifetimes, the past, present, and future. So that's that. Now, there are other ways of looking at the 12 links of interdependence. You can look at them, as I said, in terms of a particular moment. There are other presentations of them. And so this is not to say that when a being is born in the form realm, for example, or the formless realm, that they're going to be exempt from 12, that they're going to miss some of the links that they're going to miss the link of contact, for example. It doesn't mean that. It just means that in terms of the explanation of using the 12 links as a way to describe their development, and that stage is missing in that perspective. But when you look at their existence in terms of the 12 links in other respects, then for every action that they take, for example, there would be the explanation, or there would be the way of looking at it as the 12 links all in a single moment. So this is just different ways of looking at the 12 links of interdependence. Okay? So I think that is enough for this afternoon. And this bit about the interdependence is complicated at first. especially when you don't know the words. If you have some time, you can just sort of go through and start trying to memorizing the words for the 12 links of interdependence, if you don't already know them by heart. And if you're studying Tibetan, you should learn them in Tibetan too. So try to do that tonight. But basically, the main point is, with the 12 links of interdependence in the level that we're looking at now, we've got 2 in the past life, 8 in the middle, 2 in the future. It's kind of like showing how the cycle goes, how one life leads to the next, leads to next. That's what we're talking about. Okay? So now we will recite the dedication of merit. Osanam de tam che se pani tomne nye pedranam pam chen kegana je barlap trobai Sibet sole drowa drowa shom. Thank you. Saswa? Oh yeah. Just 2 of you.